You're listening to the Sketchnote Army Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Rohde, the author of the Sketchnote Handbook and the Sketchnote Workbook, and this is the podcast where I chat with sketchnoters and visual thinkers and try to understand what makes them tick. Hey, are you looking for the ideal sketchbook for your sketchnoting practice? The Sketchnote Idea Book is the sketchbook designed for sketchnoters. Equipped with no bleed, no show-through paper, you can take almost any marker or pen you can throw at it. Get 10% off with code ARMY at airship.store. Hey everyone, it's Mike and I'm here with Alina Gutierrez. I'm going to do that again. I kind of stumbled over my own words. So do you think
it's a hard last name, but you did pretty well.
So I had a friend named Gutierrez for a long time, so I think I've said the name a lot. So
that
it's in my head.
It. Yes. Okay.
But I'm not going to worry about the third name. We'll just say Alina Gutierrez from Visua. What's the right way to say? Visua Versa?
Visual Versa.
Visual Versa.
So it's like vice versa, but with visual, yeah.
Visual Versa. Okay. I want to make sure I got that right. So I'll identify where you're from and then we'll go. Okay. Try again.
Sounds good.
Hey everybody, it's Mike and I'm here with Alina Gutierrez from Visual Versa. Alina, it's so good to have you. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you. I'm super excited to be here.
Yeah, me too. You were a recommendation from my friend Alejo Porras, who has been on the show in the past, and he's coming back again this season because so much has changed in his world. But he highly recommended you, and I'm always looking for new, interesting people, and you fit that perfectly. So why don't you tell us a little about who you are and what you do?
Perfect. Thank you. That's such a simple question, yet a complex answer.
Sure.
So who am I? I'm a mom, wife, friend, all kinds of roles. And I like starting with that because I think beyond whatever we do, we're all humans and have a personal life outside what we do. So I have two little boys, 7 and 8. I'm originally from Colombia, but I've been in Canada. I lost count, I think since 2007, around those dates. I am the founder of Visual Versa. I've been working for a little bit over 10 years, bringing color and visual notes to organizations. And well, there's a little bit of everything because I have a background all over the place. And I think through Visual Versa, I found a way to merge all those passion and all that experience that I've had gained. And I don't know if I answer.
It sounds like you have you're kind of a generalist, I would say. You have lots of skills and you find ways to kind of weave them together. Maybe that's a way to say it, I guess.
I love that. Yes.
Yeah, there you go. You can steal that if you want to.
I like it. Thank you. I'll be stealing it. Yeah.
Well, you sort of hinted at it, but I'm really curious. I'm always curious for every guest, but especially in this case with you, how you ended up in this place. It sounds like you had lots of interests and lots of things happening, and yet you found this way to weave them together or find a place to weave them together. I suspect there were things you did in the past where you couldn't do the other things, like you had to focus on one thing and maybe you're frustrated, or tell us that story. Go all the way back to even when you were a little girl. Were there things that you did as a little girl that you see now the thread tying you to the present?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was actually having a conversation with my parents not too long ago, and they were like, we're not surprised you're doing what you're doing right now. I used to paint everywhere. Like I was the one who did a mural in my room and painted my jackets and painted on my backpack, whatever, you name it, I've painted on it. I was blessed enough to have a family that allowed me to do that. But I also had, I would say this duality between that rational side of me and the artistic side. I think a lot of it came from my background, back home, the opportunities or the amount of jobs available were not as many back then. Right now, I think there's a lot of stuff going on, and there's actually a lot of people doing sketch notes back home and really good people. But I felt that I had to go for a more secure career. So when it came to the time where I had to design what I wanted to do, I went into a program called design engineering.
Mm,
So it had like that design aspect of it, the creativity, but it had the engineering title that kind
mm,
of had that recognition, social recognition. Back in high school, I was the one who like painted doors for every single party or whatever we were celebrating. I was part of a musical actually in my hometown, so I used to like sing and act. And then I got to university, and despite like the design part of the program, there was a lot of calculus and physics and all that kind of
mm,
stuff. Um, and I've been kind of a perfectionist my whole life, so I wanted to excel, but I had to like put a lot of effort into it. And I've realized by now, but like, looking back, it's like sometimes when you have to push that more effort, things do not come natural to you. Maybe that's not your place. Doesn't mean that you cannot do it. If you put yourself to it, you can. But like all the creative part of it used to come so natural to me.
mm,
And then there was this opportunity to do exchange program in Quebec. So I applied to university, and the way it worked, it was like a government agreement between governments. So I could come here and do a semester or a year of my program, and some students would go there. So I had
mm,
to pay for my expenses, but I didn't have to pay for the university. And I applied to Concordia University. I got accepted. And then when I got my acceptance letter, they said, the only thing is we don't have the same program here. So you have to either go into fine arts or the engineering department.
mm,
And it was like, ta-da! Like I was so excited, scared but excited. So I said, I want to go into fine arts.
mm,
And, that self-doubt of like, oh, maybe I don't have what it takes because, it's people that are doing like all like plain arts, and I haven't done that much, but I submitted my portfolio, got accepted, and came to Montreal. And after I got here, I kept extending my stay, extending. I was like, oh, I like it. I'm gonna finish my program and then, go back home. Then I graduated, and they were in Canada. When you graduate as an international student, they give you a work permit. And I was like, no, I need to get work experience here and then go
mhm.
back home with that in my CV. And long story short, I ended up staying. I met someone, and and it's been way too long, and I'm still here. Um, I'm getting to your question.
Oh, this
I
is all part
then
of the question. You're doing excellent. Keep going.
Okay, so I then graduated, and I had to find a job because part of the
Mm,
rule is like they give you a work permit, but you have to find a job within a timeline. And I found a job. It was hard for me to find a job because you had to speak English and French for most
mm, mhm,
most like job openings, and I didn't speak French back then. And I found something. I was not too happy. Then found a job at a bank. You figure. Um, they hire me. They were like, we don't care. You don't have that background. We'll train you in the
mm,
background, but you have that like personal, you like dealing with people. You're good at
mhm,
customer service. You're good. I worked at a bank for 3 years, and it got to the day where my boss was like, okay, we need to do something about your background so you can keep advancing at the bank. Um, I needed to go back to school and do a program
mm,
in like business or HR, whatever it is that is a little bit more aligned with the bank than fine arts. And I was like, sure, fair enough. So I went back to school, and I couldn't keep up with classes. I couldn't keep up with
mm,
my notes. I started doing a program in organizational psychology or change management type of thing.
mhm, mhm,
And it was really text heavy. The things were complicated. And then I started getting sketchbooks instead of like aligned, like the
mhm.
traditional lined book. And I would do mind maps. And every time that like I would get, because I would get stuck in like, I don't know how to write that word. And then every time that I didn't know how to write that word, I would doodle it and keep going.
Ah, okay.
And then during my second year, one prof came to me and she was like, Alina, do you do graphic facilitation? And I was like, wait, I do what?
What is that?
What's that? And she said graphic facilitation. And I'm like, well, it has the word graphic in it, so it sounds cool, but I have no idea what that is. And she was like, okay, you should look into it. And I was like, sure. And I remember that night, like it was yesterday, I came home and I Googled graphic facilitation. And then I started looking at people like doing these big drawings in front of people. And I was like, people get paid to do that? That is such a cool job. Like that's what I want to do. Um, and then I started looking into courses, that academic side of me is like, I have to get trained. I have
Mhm,
to get something, so I can start. So I took a 2-day course here in Montreal of graphic facilitation. And then, my classmates and the profs started seeing what I was doing. And they were like, why don't you come in front of the class and take notes? So, the professor would
mm,
explain something. I would
mhm.
like doodle. And then at the end of the class, people would take pictures. And I was like,
Wow.
okay, there's something in here. And initially, I thought it was like, oh, this is something that helps me because I'm studying in my
Right.
second language. I'm doing a program in the second language. But then I realized that even people from here who were studying in their native tongue were like, that's really cool. Can I take pictures of your notes to
Hmm.
study for the papers or to write the papers? And I was like, cool, yeah, take pictures. And then the university was doing events and I started volunteering myself and I would do it in exchange for materials. So I was like, hey, I need to get these markers that are super expensive. Can you buy 3 or 4 of those markers? And then I'll take visual notes at your event. And they were like, sure. So, or can you get me paper and whatever? And then I started getting exposure and, practice. Because now I look at the first visual notes that I took and I'm like, I can't believe someone let me do
Yeah.
that.
Same for me too. When I look back at the first
Right?
sketch, and I was like, what was I thinking? But
What
yeah.
was I thinking? And I'm like, how come I was not even like shy to go in front of people and do that? But I'm grateful. I'm really grateful
Yeah.
because that's the way it started. And then I realized there was a career in it, and because my background is in workshop design and facilitation and strategic sessions, then I do that as well. But I bring
Ah.
that creative aspect. So it doesn't matter what type of workshop I'm designing. It doesn't matter what type of a strategic session or whatever I'm doing. There's always doodles or images or visual metaphors or whatever it is involved in the planning and delivery
Mm.
of these workshops. I always bring that aspect
Mm.
into my work.
Interesting. Well, it's interesting because you say that you're doing this now, but you were kind of going to school for change management. Was there a shift somewhere that you made a change? Because obviously you were now excited about this graphic facilitation you discovered, but
Yeah.
you obviously were not going in that direction. So how did you manage that with the bank? And like that sounds like a whole story in itself, huh?
Yes, that could be another episode of the podcast. But let me try to make it short. Okay,
Okay.
I'm bad at like answering short. I always go on and tell a long story. Long story short, I gave myself a deadline. So I had a year left to finish my program. I asked for a leave at the bank and I said, okay, I have, what it takes for me to leave for a year and see what happens. So if from now in a year, I see I can make this my full-time job, I'll quit the bank. And if I can, then I'll go back, you know,
Hmm.
no harm. I gave it a try at least, right? And I gave myself a year, and by the end of the year, I had enough to like be able to take the risk. And then
Mm.
I quit the bank and started doing this full time.
Mm. Pretty smart. Pretty smart way to approach it.
I always have like, yeah, I need to, I go with the flow, I adapt, but at the same time, I always need like my plan A, B, and C in case because I know things don't always work the way we
Right.
want it. But yeah,
Hmm. So then you proved that you could do it for a year, that it was something you could survive with. And then I assume
exactly.
then that's probably when you started doing this other schooling or education, it sounds like, for what you were talking about around facilitation and meeting plan. Or I guess I'll let you describe it because I don't know exactly what that focus was.
That's fine. That was actually part of the program I was doing when I discovered visual notes.
Ah, okay.
Yeah,
Ah,
it's a program where we talked a lot about creating containers for people, facilitating
okay.
spaces so people can have the conversation. So I'm not the expert in whatever topic they're going to talk about, which I think is pretty aligned with graphic facilitation. Like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
people, like sometimes I'm taking visual notes for like the pharmaceutical or a non-for-profit, organization, and they're like, "Oh, so you just work with these type of organizations?" I'm like, "No." So how do you understand what we're talking about? I'm like, I don't really understand the whole, like I don't understand every little
Yeah.
detail,
Yeah.
but I understand what you're talking about. And I mean,
Right.
there's always the option of like putting a post-it on with a word that I didn't understand and going and asking people, but we don't need to be the experts in their topic.
Right.
I actually think it gives a nice fresh perspective because from an outsider perspective, we get to ask different questions. And with facilitation, it's like that. So it was
Mm-hmm.
part of the program.
Cool.
I was doing it with the goal in mind of going back to the bank and hopefully going into HR because I loved training and development.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I ended up doing training and development, but on my own.
In a different way. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
So was
And
one question about when you sort of did that 1 year, was there one client or project that sort of made you say, okay, I can do this? Was it that, or was it more like there were a lot of clients that said, okay, I think I can make this work? How did that go in that year between?
it was, yes, it was more about multiple clients and one
Mm.
client, but it was also the idea of, I started seeing the ripple effect that it could create. It was something innovative enough or different enough for me to most of the time leave each event with at least one potential client.
Mm.
At least. And I would say at least because most of the time you leave with like 2 or 3 referrals, and sometimes
Wow.
even down the line, you get more. Especially in conferences where you get people from different organizations. So it's not the same if I do any strategic planning where it's like an internal group. Yes, I
Hmm.
might get referrals to other departments, but I don't get as much ripple effect than when I go into a conference of like, I don't know, real estate agents, or like, a conference on like non-for-profit organizations that are working mental health. But in one meeting or in one conference, I might get access to 60 different organizations or more.
Hmm.
And that's where I started seeing, okay, like this is creating a pipeline uh, good enough for me to like see the potential
Hmm.
and take a risk and give it a try.
Hmm. Cool. So then now we'll pick up again. So you've done the year. You've decided that this is the way you're going to go. You quit the bank. So what
Yeah,
happens next?
it's really scary.
I would guess
Then
so.
I
Yeah.
quit. Yeah, then you quit the bank, and like it was really comfortable to get a paycheck every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And then I realized that, there's months where I was making like 3 or 4 times what I was making at the bank, and then months where I was making $0. And,
Hmm.
like it gets way better as the years move, like there's also a cycle throughout the year and you learn to deal with it. So I know most of the time January is a quiet month, but
Hmm.
then I take that month to like reach out to clients, do a lot of admin work, prepare things. I have now my online aspect to my business. So I have like an online course and an ebook and all that kind of stuff. So I know that during January, I can take that time without like the anxiety of like nothing is
Mm.
coming. It's normal that nothing is coming. And so like I kind of started seeing the cycle. But what happened once I quit the bank was I started reaching out to people I knew, or like looking for events in the city and reaching out to the events, being like, this is what I do. The difference is that right now, I would say one out of two people, I tell them I take visual notes, they're like, that's really cool. And the other person would be like, you do what? But
Mm.
back then, 2 out of 2 people were like, you do what? So
Yeah.
it was really hard to explain. And I found myself in that reality that it was like, okay, it was really easy for me to get referrals out of an event where people saw what I did.
Hmm.
It was not as easy to reach out to people and be like, look, this is what I do and these are the benefits. And obviously, it's way easier for me 10 years later to explain the benefits than back then. So I got into a roller coaster. It had its ups
Mm.
and downs, and moments where I was like, what am I doing? I'm gonna look for a full-time job again. And then other moments where I was like, this is amazing, and um, but I think I've learned a little bit to deal with that roller coaster and appreciate the highs and be prepared for the lows because,
Mm.
as an entrepreneur, that always happens.
Yeah. I think, and I don't know your language skills in French, but I think one advantage you hold is you understand Spanish, English, and I assume by now some degree of French. I don't know how much. That could be
Yes,
really
yeah,
valuable in that environment, in Quebec especially, right? Because there's probably multiple languages probably being spoken, and that would set you
abs
apart, I suspect.
absolutely. Yes, and it's also shown me a different part that I didn't realize at the beginning, but a different part of this amazing tool, and is how we can make information accessible even during an event,
Mm.
especially in Quebec. Our reality is most events have to deal with that duality, the bilingualism, and there's
Hmm.
not always like a translator right there. And
Hmm.
sometimes people are presenting in English and switch to French. And I've done it where like if their person is presenting in English, I take visual notes in French. And if they're presenting in
Ah,
French, I take visual notes in English. And
interesting.
I had people come and see me at the end and be like, every time I didn't understand what was going on, I would turn and look at your notes and be like,
Ah.
oh, okay, they're talking about this. Like they might not get the full detailed thing, but
Hmm.
at least they had an idea of what was going on. Every time they got lost, they could look at the notes and be like, oh, okay, this is where we're going. And so it's been a nice experience. And obviously being me, I was like, there's something in there. So um let's add another layer to my story. I started my PhD about some years ago, longer than I would like to say, but because it's taken way too long. But I was like, you know what? There's there's a lot of a lot of people saying, look, this works and this is what it is, and because of my personal experience, but there's not a lot of research behind it. There is
Hmm.
some, but not as much. And I was like, I want to start getting into that, into how like we can make communication more accessible, how we could use these type of tools to work. Because the reality nowadays is that in most teams, you have someone like me who's working in their second or third language.
Hmm.
And even if we have a good level of understanding and speaking, sometimes it well, even when we're speaking our mother tongue, we have misunderstandings.
Right.
Communication is hard. And adding this thing where like I could doodle as I'm explaining things and we can have a conversation and make sure that literally we're on the same page. And we're like, oh no, like Alina, this is not what I had in mind. Or like, oh, what about if we move this line here? But we don't go on and each work on our projects and realize we were on different pages and didn't realize it. So I was like, I wanna look into that. So I started doing a PhD, and I'm researching was the effect of using visual tools to facilitate change
Hmm.
in organizations and communities.
Hmm. Wow, that's really cool. And so when you finish the PhD, do you have plans to include, I assume, imagery to convey and communicate your points?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's the
Right.
idea. I mean,
Yeah.
writing papers in English just is not easy at all for me.
Yeah.
I am lucky enough to have a committee that like that they're super open to innovative ideas, and I think thanks to that, I've been able to get to the point where I'm at. Um, I should have been finished by now, but like in between, starting the PhD and now, I had my second baby and there was
Mm.
COVID, and there's been all kinds of stuff
Yeah.
that we don't plan for, so it's been taking way longer, but it's still something that informs my practice and my practice informs my research. And I like that way of being able to bring things from one side to the other.
Mm.
And it's also giving me tools to teach, because I love teaching, but I don't have a background in teaching. Facilitation and teaching, I think they have
Hmm.
tools they share and principles they
Yeah.
share, but it's giving me a little bit of tools and resources for me to do a better job when I'm trying to
Mm.
teach this tool to others.
Well, there's two thoughts around that. One is for English speakers, writing papers and PhDs is not easy in English. So, I mean, you don't feel too bad about that. It's tough all around, right? But I'm sure there's probably challenges you face that maybe a native English speaker might not. The second thing I was going to mention is a book my friend Nick Zuzanis wrote. He was on the show many, many seasons ago, and it's a book called Unflattening. You can
Okay.
look that up, and anybody who's listening, look up Unflattening. It is a graphic novel that he submitted as his PhD paper explaining why graphic novels are a superior form of communication for ideas. So,
Awesome.
my
I'm
thought
not
is,
only going to look out the book, I'm going to reach out.
yeah, I can make that connection with you if you like and
Thank
talk to
you.
Nick. I
I
think it would be
appreciate it.
really
Yeah.
interesting for you to see, even if you just see photos of it, but you could certainly order a copy of it. And see
I
like
will
how he
absolutely
did
do
it,
that.
right? Because that might inspire you when you submit your PhD. Maybe you can bring to your committee like, hey, I want to make it maybe not to this degree because the whole thing is a comic book, right? His focus is on graphic novels and comics as a communication device. So very
Yeah.
very possibly you could, take ideas from it and but make your PhD paper much more visual than maybe anybody would expect. And that could
I know.
advantage, what you're trying to do.
And that's the idea. I mean, I don't want to do, and I tend to fall into that trap sometimes. But like if I'm talking about visuals, I don't want to have something really text heavy.
Hmm.
So I know it's academic and I still have to have that research power, but
Yeah.
a big part of it I think can be visual. And I've had that conversation with my supervisor. And now when you ask me about my story, I forgot, and it's actually
Mm.
during high school there was a way that I got out of a paper, a philosophy paper, um, saying I wanted to do visuals to represent that. And
Hmm.
I negotiated with the teacher, and I ended up giving him a booklet with drawings instead of doing a paper and actually one
Mm.
exam. And I did the same through my master's program with the
Mm.
prof that is now my supervisor, where I was like, I'm so tired of writing papers. It takes so much energy. And I think I spent like double the time doing this
Mm.
booklet, but I had so much fun. And up to today, years later, I could still talk to the topic,
Mm.
which doesn't happen with the tons of paper I wrote throughout
Yeah.
the program.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
That's really
that's the
cool.
idea. I don't know how far they'll let me go with it, but like I'm
Yeah.
like, yes, my thesis is gonna be like image heavy, not text heavy.
Sounds like you're a negotiator already, so you'll probably find a way to negotiate something, right?
Yes.
And,
Yeah.
find a way to make everybody happy. So, but yeah, that's really interesting. And so now you're doing this full time. It sounds like it can be a roller coaster at times, which being independent can often be. Tell me about a project that you're working on, or maybe something you just finished that you can share that got you excited that you can tell us about, and then we can see like, okay, here's how all the things that you're interested in fit together in a project.
Mhm. I actually just finished working with a client and I worked with them for several years. The name of the organization is One Drop. If you haven't heard about it, go and look it up. It's
Mm,
an amazing organization. Is what it was created by Guy Laliberté. Is the same founder of Cirque du Soleil. So
mm,
it's a non-for-profit. They work in different countries. They work in India, South America, up north here, up north, in Africa. Anyways, they have tons of projects. Most of the projects that I was working with them were the ones in Latin America. So it's a project
mhm,
called Lazos de Agua, and they bring clean water
mm,
to underprivileged communities.
mhm,
But then what they realized, obviously, is this was founded by Gila Liberté, that like it had to have that like creative side of it. So they were like, a lot of times we spend tons of money in the infrastructure of these projects. We bring clean water to the communities, and then it happens that people are not using it, like because sometimes they
mm,
have to walk still a distance to do it. But it's because there's a behavior change included, right? Like if
mhm,
you were used to walking to the river, meeting all people from the community, grabbing water there, or washing your clothes there, it's not the same. Like there's a component of these projects that is behavior change. You have to
mhm,
like create that awareness in the community. So they use an approach that is called social art for behavior change, where they use art to work with the communities
mm,
as, a parallel approach. While there's people working in the infrastructure, there is this amazing team of people working with the communities in behavior change. And they work with people from the community. So it's
mm,
initiatives and art that comes from the community. So they use actually local art to do different things. And I worked with them in, it was so nice because I found one organization where I could actually use all my skills. Sometimes I would facilitate sessions, sometimes I design interventions, sometimes I was designing visual tools that they
mm,
would use when they would go and meet with the community. I actually helped them design and facilitate a big event that happened to celebrate the anniversary of the program in Mexico last year. So it was an organization with which I could use all my facets and
mm,
experiences. And they also work in English, French, and Spanish with like
mm.
to me, like when I got there, I was like, oh my goodness, this place was created for me. It was so good. Like I could be
Yeah.
part of different projects and take different hats. And I realized, so with them, it was the first time that I actually started using visual tools and visual notes as a tool for behavior change.
Mm,
And that part I had not experienced it before. And it got me into another road where I started learning a lot on how to do it and how to involve with the community. They're also like they don't go and impose, like it's not like they go and they have an intervention and it's ready and it's done. Like they go, they work with the community,
mm,
they get people from the community to facilitate, to co-design, to co-create, like everything is done together. And it was such an amazing experience.
mm, mm.
Wow, I learned a lot.
Well, that's pretty cool because then if I would imagine if the people who co-create, it's more likely they will adopt. So if it's their choice or they have a hand in, hey, we're not going to the river anymore, we're going to the well, right? They would say, well,
Yeah.
what things do we do at the river? Well, we wash our clothes, we probably chat, we gossip, like so how do we relocate that stuff to another place? And I'm sure you facilitated all that kind of change, right, with them. And
Yeah.
that's pretty cool. That sounds really like a fun project.
It was like the tons of projects throughout the pandemic, also working with like the hand washing behavior and
Mm,
soap and like even so they even went the extra mile and like, okay, we're gonna create the capacity within the community. So there are communities that didn't have access to local this soap, like they would have.
mm,
So okay, let's inject some capital in the community so someone could start a beer business and do
make some
soap
soap.
and sell
Yeah.
soap to like So it's like this whole chain of we're thinking about the different components and kind of addressing them. And yeah, it was such a cool experience to have and to see how we're using a tool to create meaningful change.
That sounds really great. Thanks for sharing that project. This episode of the Sketchnote Army Podcast is brought to you by Concepts, a perfect tool for sketchnoting, available on iOS, Windows, and Android. Concepts' vector-based drawing feature gives you the power to adjust your drawings anytime you like. You can nudge the curve of a line, swap out one brush for another, or change the stroke thickness and color at any stage of your drawing, saving hours and hours of rework. Vectors provide clean, crisp, high-resolution output for your sketch notes at any size you need, large or small. Never worry about fuzzy sketch notes again. Concepts is a powerful, flexible tool that's ideal for sketchnoting. Search Concepts in your favorite app store to give it a try. Well, so let's shift now to tools. We're always curious here on the show what kind of tools you like. I don't know if you use digital, but we typically do analog tools and then digital tools, mainly because
Mhm.
everybody says iPad Pro, Pencil, and Procreate, which is incredibly boring. And there's often so many fun, pens and markers and paints and things that people use that maybe are unexpected. So I would love to hear, like when you do your graphic facilitation or anything that you
Yeah.
where you use regularly, tell us about the kind of tools you use, and then you can do the digital stuff at the end if you like.
Yeah, the digital stuff, I'm gonna be boring. So
Like most people.
let's let's go into the analog. Look, I'm all over the place, and I like saying this because obviously I love Noland. I love the fact that
Hmm.
you can refill the markers. I love the fact that like I love everything about that brand. I have their board. I love them. Like, but they're an investment.
Yeah.
And it's something that I did once I was into this for a while and I could do that investment, but I literally use Crayola markers with
Mm.
in my workshops, right? Like it's and I tell people you can get started with that. I got
Yeah.
started with Omer so it's like a local art store here. They have their home brand. They're super affordable and
Mm.
they're amazing markers. The only thing is that I realized every like 3 months I needed to buy new markers,
Mm.
which it hasn't happened to me since I got Nolan. No, I
Hmm.
can't even say the name. I should know, but um, so I'm all over the place. I use Crayola, I use Sharpie, I use local brands, and then when it's me, well, for my workshops, and when it's me taking my visual notes, I use Newland.
Okay, got it. Are you
Yeah.
someone who experiments? Like, do you go to the art store and like, oh, that would be interesting to try, and you pick things up? Are you
Yes.
like that? Okay, that's me too.
I love that. And I love finding clients who are up to, so like I started using Posca or Poshka, I don't know,
Hmm.
like it's
Hmm.
acrylic markers not too long ago. And I got them and they have amazing colors, like really bright colors.
Hmm.
And I told the client, I'm like, like it's gonna be different. Is it okay if I give it a try? Yeah, 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 give it a try. And I think it's like one of the most colorful graphic recordings I've
Mm.
done. I loved it. I try even with acrylic when it's something that is like a long event or when
Hmm.
I could prepare some graphics ahead of time. I've done if I prepare things because sometimes I come with like posters that are already illustrated for people to fill in
I
with
see.
ideas. And then in there, I've tried everything.
Mm.
Ink, acrylics, you name it.
Mm.
Pastels, I use pastels a lot too,
Mm.
especially with people that are starting when I'm teaching them. I show them things they can do with pastels that is not complicated, doesn't take a lot of time, but it brings a little bit of a colorful effect to your graphics.
Mm.
So they look like you did it
Really
really
cool.
fast, but it's just
Yeah.
because it's easy to just spread the pastel around and like give a little bit of shadow or highlight to whatever
Huh.
you're drawing.
Interesting. It's interesting that going back to when you were a little girl and you painted everything, that you found a way to incorporate Posca markers and paint markers into that process. So it's sort of it's full circle, right? In some way.
Absolutely. And it might sound weird, but I love getting my hands dirty. Like at the end of a job when like my hands are full of colors, it's like it gives me this sense of like, oh, you did something really cool today. It was like that. I think like it connects with that, inner child of like, I was able to like get
Mm.
dirty and like do colorful stuff, and it's always fun.
Mm. You're really in there, right? You're in there doing it. Your hands are dirty.
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
that.
exactly. Like
What about
literally.
what about paper and notebooks and those kind of things? Sounds like you like large scale, but do you work with any notebooks? Do you do any personal stuff in notebooks or sheets of paper, anything like that you can share?
So I do. Yes, I have all kinds of sketchbooks. I have them all. I have yours. I love it. Um, for me, it's more about having thick paper that I know
Yeah.
I can. I don't know. Somehow it bothers me if I draw with a marker and then you can see it on the other side because
Okay.
it's like then I cannot use both sides of the paper.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, so I love like thick, good quality paper when it comes to taking visual notes. But even for my day-to-day stuff, like I have my own notebooks, like Visual Versa has a line of notebooks,
Nice.
and even for like the day-to-day things, obviously they have good quality paper because I'm all about that, but they're not as thick. But I'm using Newland Fine One.
Okay.
And
Yep.
then, like, because even if I have a meeting with a client or whatever, like I'm always taking notes and my notes are never linear. Like I can't go
Mm.
back.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess I'm not being super helpful because I use anything that has no lines.
Okay. So clean paper,
Yeah.
thick paper, clean and thick.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
Now, what about your large scale? Do you have a supplier of large scale thick paper that you like to use that you can stick on a wall and you know the markers aren't going to bleed through to the back?
Oh yeah, that was a good experience to get because, before I had my own board that I could bring everywhere, there was that struggle of like, are you sure that, like the markers are not going to go to the wall? And then I used
Yeah.
like double paper and it's such a waste of paper
Hmm.
until I found, but it's a local store that sells rolls of
Mm.
paper.
Okay.
And I'm always scared they're going to stop selling them. So I always buy like 5 rolls or 10 rolls in advance just in case because it was not easy to find one. And I have my roles there, like, to make sure that if, one day they tell me we don't sell them anymore, because I'm pretty sure not a lot of people buy those papers.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, at least I'll have a little bit of you know, time, a cushion there to find another provider that is
Mm.
good.
Mm.
Right? They're called Omer de Serre and is a local, is the same that I mentioned for the markers.
Mm.
I have the markers as well.
Yeah. We'll have to
They're
get
really
you
cool.
we'll have to have you send some links so if someone's in Quebec or in Canada, they can get
Absolutely.
access.
Yeah.
I suppose they might sell internationally like to the US and but then you'll really pay for it in shipping, I suspect, but or VAT or something like that. So,
Yeah. But I mean, like for the paper, it might be worth it. It's like really good quality paper. And
mm,
I've looked around always to have like a plan B. I always have like having the plan B, but I haven't found something as
mm,
good and like price, quality,
mm,
because it's not extremely expensive for the quality they have.
mm. So do you just cut do you have a standard size and you cut it and then you bring rolls and then stick them on the wall? Or do you have a board that you mount those to? How does that part of it work for you?
Yeah. So I have the modular board. So depending on how long the event is, sometimes I use my 4 modules, which is like pretty big, and sometimes I just use 2. So I use 2, 3, or
Mm,
4. I'm most of the time I no, I think I've never used one. So for a half day event, normally I would use just 2 panels, and then full day, depending on how packed the schedule is, I use 3 or 4 panels.
okay.
So I always bring my roll with me and
Mm,
cut depending
what you need.
on what I need exactly. Yeah.
Is that the Neuland graphic wall? Is that what it's called?
Yes.
So I know there's two
Yeah.
products, and I hadn't
Because
realized this till I talked to somebody else. So the graphic wall is for this, like graphic recorders, large scale. But there's a
hmm
smaller scale thing called graphic Wally, which is like the
Wally,
little
exactly.
brother, right? It's got a roll of paper, and you bring it across, and you can do the same thing, but on a small scale. And I think they
Yeah.
even probably imagine like you would put a camera on it, right? So if you're working remotely, you
Correct.
could show it this way, right? So
Yeah.
interesting.
Um, I don't have the graphic Wally. That's on my wish list.
Yeah, yeah.
But the wall, yes, and I've had it for 9 years now, and it's
Wow.
still working great. And it's light because like moving the stuff that size
Hmm.
could be really
Heavy.
hard, and it's not hard at all. And it avoids the problem. Like a lot of times, I would get to a building, and they were like, "Oh no, this building we don't allow anything on the
Mm.
wall." And then you had the struggle of it doesn't matter how many times you ask the clients. They're like, "Yeah, yeah, no problem." Then you get there, no, you can't. I
Mm.
actually did a whole day of visual notes on the floor,
Oh
which was a
man,
really interesting experience. But
kind of
something
crawling
about
around.
going back
Yeah.
to your childhood is like you're doing like things, and at the end I embraced it, and I made people like step on different icons depending on what it
Mm.
was. Like it ended up being a really cool experience, and I actually have a picture of it that I use on my website because it seems like
Mm.
it was a
Neat.
really creative
Yeah.
moment. People were literally like stepping on the words and the things to like vote for things. It
Mm.
was cool, but at the moment, it was like, oh my goodness, what am I gonna do? I'm already here. I have my materials. We're about to start. Let's figure something out. And now I don't have to go through that. I have my board,
You have
and
your wall.
is
Yeah.
yeah, and it's flexible enough that if the space is not big, sometimes what I do, even if it's a full day event, I just use two panels and then
Mm.
sometimes have two posters. So one for the morning and one for the afternoon.
I see. Yeah. Smart.
Yeah,
Smart. Cool. That's really good. We'll make sure we get links to all these products that we can find with Alina and me. I'm
absolutely.
sure we can do that. And Esther, who does our show notes, loves to dig for this stuff. So we'll get that in the show notes for you. Let's shift now to tips. So the way I like to frame it for guests is imagine someone's listening. They're a visual thinker of some kind, but maybe they've reached a plateau or they just need a little inspiration or a pick me up. What would be three things you would tell them to encourage them in their practice to keep on going and to keep striving?
So the first thing that I always tell people is, and I think it applies to everything, but it applies to visual notes, is it doesn't matter in which part of this process you are, push yourself a little bit to try something
Mm,
new. So it doesn't become boring. There's always that thing of like, if you're, I tell people, if you're scared, it's because you care. But it's also like, if you're not scared, if you feel so confident, it's like you're not pushing yourself enough.
mm,
So, in my case, for example, it's like trying a new medium or pushing myself to try new icons, try new ways to engage with the audience.
hmm
So, like in whatever facet this comes, like if you're a really experienced graphic facilitator, then I will invite you to push yourself to find different ways to engage with the audience, because I found throughout the years that the more people are engaged with the creation of the visual, the more impact it has with the group.
mm,
It's not the same thing when I'm that silent partner in the corner that people just see at the end and they're like, oh wow, really cool. And that's it. Let's move next, like, move past that. Than when they're part of this co-creation, they're actually
mm.
feeding you ideas. And then at the end, they see their ideas with illustrations and they're like, I just said that. Look, like there's a drawing of what I said. And they get super
Yeah.
excited. And there's way more buy-in. I actually just visited a client who I did a strategic session for 8 years ago, and they had my poster on the wall. And I was like, wow. And she's like, it's so amazing because this poster happened when the initiative didn't exist. They were brainstorming about it.
Mm,
And now they're a full department and they take grants and they help students with innovation projects. And they're like, that was our first session when we
mm.
dreamt about, like, it was our dream that all this stuff would happen. And now it's happening.
Now it's
And they
real.
still
Yeah.
have that poster there.
Wow.
But they were engaged throughout the session, right? Like they were coming to me, they were giving me post-its, they were like saying, so engage people. If you're starting, then pushing yourself might mean, you know, well, you haven't tried taking live notes. And I think that's a scary step for anyone. Is one thing is taking notes for yourself, doing summaries or whatever, but no one is gonna look
hmm
to see them. Or also you don't have that time pressure. When it comes to taking live notes, I think there's always that, it's a big leap. But I would say, you know, they don't, well, first, don't compare yourself with someone who's been doing it for 10 years. Like if I would have compared myself when I started with someone who was doing it 10 years and I would have stopped because of that, I would not be doing what I'm doing right now.
Right. Right.
I knew what I could do, and and I was transparent with my clients. And I would say, as far as you're using arrows and speech bubbles, you're already being more visual than most people.
hmm
So I would say, like give yourself realistic goals. They're a little bit stretched, but they're not too far out. So you're paralyzed and you don't do
mm
anything. And if you're not taking the life notes yet, then I tell people, listen to a TED Talk or listen to a podcast and take notes. And then you tell yourself, this time I'm going to have one icon. When it gets to the point that having just one icon in your notes is too easy, Then you have 2 icons for podcast, then 3,
Hmm.
then 4. Like it could be just an icon for the title and the rest is a mind map with no more visuals. But you're already doing something more visual than what you were doing before. So it's just taking those baby steps, but keep pushing it to the next level.
Hmm.
That was like 7 tips in one.
Well, Esther will have fun finding those tips and putting them in. So we'll make sure we capture those and number them for you, everybody. And they'll also appear, of course, in our end of the season, all the tips episodes, so you can hear this all again with everybody else. So thank you for those
I'm so
tips.
excited for the end of the season tips to see
A lot of people say
how
that's
they
their favorite
come.
episode. Yeah, it's a great one. I enjoy doing
Is it
that.
okay if I add another tip to
Go
the
for it. Go for it.
okay. Okay. So I would say try doing something or taking visual notes or whatever it is from something you've never experienced before.
Mm,
Let me explain that. If you're really, let's say you're in the tech industry, try to do that listening to someone talking about design. No, design thinking is good in the tech industry. Someone talking about, human systems or facilitation or even like medical innovation, whatever it is. Like just look for something that you're not an expert
mm,
in and take visual notes of that.
mm,
I love it because sometimes it's like we're already comfortable. We fall into we're comfortable enough doing visual notes of whatever we know best.
hmm
But it also, well, I would say it gives you the exposure to learn something new, which is always good for creativity. It's been proven again and again. It also shows you how much you don't have to be an expert of something to be
mm,
able to take these visual notes. So even going back to that person who's scared of taking live visual notes, doing that might help you build your confidence a little bit in the sense that,
hmm
you don't have to be an expert. You'll understand enough for you to be able to do a visual summary. Um, and it's also because I think the more things that and the more fields that we're exposed to, the more we start seeing how we can transfer one thing
hmm
to another. So I think it's a good practice and it's something that I push myself to do when I'm getting really comfortable in somewhere. So it goes back to the uncomfort, like leaving your
hmm
comfort zone,
hmm
but the being exposed, like getting yourself exposed to different things and different tools and looking for inspiration. People are like, oh, I don't want to copy anyone. You're not going to copy. Even if you try, you can't do exactly the same thing. Your style is different. But every time that I'm like, I feel I've been doing, I don't know, there's 3 or 4 posters that they look too similar. I start looking for other people in the field that are doing visual notes and see what they do that I'm not doing. So like,
mm,
oh, maybe I'm always putting the title up, like my comfort zone is putting the title center, but top center. And he's like, okay, you know what? Next time I'm going to do title in the middle. And it's uncomfortable. And I get like, oh, the first line is always the hardest. So, but try to do something that you haven't done before,
mm,
and that sometimes helps with the blockage in whatever sense that
mm.
you're doing it or just doing the first line.
Yeah.
Sometimes I sign my poster before I start.
Keeps
A
it
blank
fresh.
paper is
Yeah.
intimidating.
Yeah.
Like a blank piece of paper is really scary. And when I feel like stakes are high, sometimes I start staring at this and I'm like, why am I doing this again? Like I get really nervous before every single time before I start taking visual notes. And if I see that nervousness is going to the next level, I'm like, you know what? I know doing that first line is the hardest. Once I get into
hmm
it, I'm in my zone and I'm having fun. So even if that means signing your piece before you get it
mm.
started, sign it. It's not blank anymore.
Yep. You're
It's kind of
committed.
like giving, yeah, you're committed. You're already started. Just jump and keep going.
Mm. Those are great tips. Thank you, Alina. It's helpful to hear your perspective and more good inspiration for people who are doing this work to encourage them. So thank you.
My
So
pleasure.
let's talk now a little bit how we can find you. What your company is Visual Versa. What's the website we should go to? Are there social media that you hang out in? Any other projects that you want to share here? We'll make sure again that these get in the show notes so you can, if you're listening, you can find the
Abs
links. Yeah.
Absolutely. So visualversa.com is my website. And then you can find me at, well, Instagram is the social media that I use the most. I
hmm
also have Facebook, but it's more because I think I have to have it, but I don't go there often. So if you're going to send me a message, definitely use Instagram. And it's at Visual Versa. And I also have my online offerings or my online course. It's called Let Me Draw What I Mean.
Mm,
Going back to that idea of, I want to teach people how to use these to explain their ideas and
mm,
make their ideas more accessible to others.
mm.
So Let Me Draw What I Mean is more like the online side of it, but for events or organizations is visual versa.
Okay, got it. One is like the educational arm, and the other is the business arm, I guess.
Exactly. The
Yeah,
one
maybe.
is Let Me Draw What I Mean was born during the pandemic, where
Mm,
like we all had to reinvent ourselves.
yeah.
And I realized how much I enjoyed it and I kept it. And then
Mm,
visual versa was what got me started.
got it. Cool. Well,
Yeah.
we'll link those up for you if you're in listening here. You can go to the show notes and find those links um, in the episode or on the website. So, well, thank you, Alina. This has been really fun to talk with you. Thank you so much for the work you're doing. I so appreciate your positive influence in the world and fighting through challenges coming from one country to another, changing jobs, learning multiple languages, and yet flourishing and making these things into who you are. I'm just so proud of you, and I wanted to let you know that. Thank you.
Wow, Mike, that means so much coming from you. I think your book is the first book I got when I got
Mm,
into visual notes. I still have it. And, like just being here for me is such an honor because I've been following you for years and I've been inspired with the work you do. So it means a lot to me to be able to be here in this space having a conversation with you. So thank you.
mm. Well, you've definitely deserved it. I'm excited, and I'm excited to see what you'll do going forward. So thank you. Thank you for sharing your time with us.
Thank you so much.
All right, everyone. Well, that's another episode of the Sketchnote Army podcast for those who are listening or watching. Until the next episode, talk to you soon. The Sketchnote Army podcast was created by me, Mike Rohde, and brought to you by Rohde Design Studios. It's produced and edited by Alec Polianis of Amp Creative Studios. The theme music was created by John Schiedermeyer. To support the creation of this show, I invite you to buy one of my books, the Sketchnote Handbook or the Sketchnote Workbook. You can find the books on Amazon or go to peachpit.com and use the code ROHDE40 for 40% off. Please share this podcast with other visual thinking friends and be sure to leave a nice rating on iTunes or your favorite podcast listening app so others can find the show.